Hey folks, quick video here on Robert Nozick. Of all of the conservative and libertarian philosophers, his libertarianism is perhaps my favorite. I think that he's interesting and thoughtful, and presents the best case for libertarianism as the rightful heir of the liberal tradition and the Lockean tradition in particular. And his big book, which behind Rawls's theory of justice, Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia, is one of the handful of really big, important political philosophy, political theory books of the second half of the 20th century. And theirs is maybe my favorite battle over competing visions of related theories, right? So I really like pairing Rawls and Nozick together. So Nozick, and man, what a handsome gentleman, right? Making me rethink the terrible way I dress for work. I want to take his theories seriously just because he's such a dapper guy there. But all right, his libertarianism, right? What is libertarianism? You hear that term a lot. There was a libertarian third-party candidate that drew some votes in this last election in 2016. A significant chunk. Libertarianism is sort of associated with conservatism, but it's more ideologically driven, right? It's often associated with a kind of extreme form of classical liberalism, Locke to his extremes in terms of the minimal state. And the reading that you guys had, which was drawn from Anarchy, State, and Utopia, though it was in a collection of other works. Nozick starts off by saying something akin to the minimal state is the only state that's justified, right? Anything more than the smallest possible state is illegitimate because it constrains more liberty than needs to be constrained, and any liberty that is constrained that need not be, that is that is tyranny, right? So this idea of the minimal state is typically interpreted as meaning, you got a military because what does a state need? It needs to control its sort of sovereign territory, keep from being invaded and conquered. You need police because otherwise you're going to have crime and theft, and you need courts to enforce contracts and agreements, and also to sentence people with police. Now, anything else? Like, there's a genuine question of are these three things all essential? How robust need they be? And is there anything else that, hey, I think roads are just as essential? Nozick says, no, you can do that through the private sphere. The private sphere can do everything else that need be done except for these things, is typically how the libertarian would interpret the needs of a minimal state, right? So when you think about Locke and the social contract, Nozick thinks everyone gets together and they say, all right, well, what can we all agree on? And say, well, should we have a state that has a military? And everyone raises their hand. Should we have police? Everyone raises their hands. And should we have courts? And everyone raises their hands. And then someone says, should we have hospitals? And 99 out of 100 people raise their hands, and that one other person says, nope, I don't think so. So no hospitals, right? The minimal state doesn't include anything that absolutely everyone would not logically necessarily agree to. So again, it's this interpretation of Locke where in Locke's contract, everyone agrees to all the powers to the state that are necessary for the functioning of the state to protect people's natural rights, but no more. And Nozick and libertarians say, yeah, and it's a really low bar what's actually necessary for the protection of natural rights. So again, this is very Lockean. It also has an affinity with John Stuart Mill and his harm principle, right? No restrictions on liberty other than acts that would harm others, and right. So that may be already just mixing in the harm principle might bump us up over the kind of minimal state that Nozick wants. But it provides us for discussion of what exactly, if we were to accept a minimal state, what it would include. And as we'll get to later on, a lot of critics of this kind of approach say, the rights of property are really what drives this kind of thing. an anti-taxation, anti-spending focus becomes the both naturalized as natural rights and the primary purpose of the state, instead of things like right, it's not a natural right to live an extra 10 years because you have good health care, but it is a natural right to not pay taxes on your wages, right? So that's where we're going to go, and he's going to make the case, right? And I think he makes it as persuasively as it can be made. Again, he's a major critic of Rawls, and he's a critic of Rawls's approach. What Rawls is doing is called distributive justice, and in the latter half of the 20th century, this was the big question. What is a just distribution of resources? What kinds of state functions, state institutions, what kind of taxes, what kind of redistribution of wealth is required in order to have a just state? That was sort of the big topic. And Nozick is important because he was one of the prominent people saying that is the wrong topic. Instead, he presents what we have in the next slide, his entitlement theory of justice. It's not what do you deserve, right? What is a just, fair distribution? It's simply what are you entitled to? What would it be wrong for the state and for other people to change, to alter, to exert power in order to produce a different outcome? And he says, all right, like here's how I'm going to start, and let's see if you agree, right? Because with every philosopher, if you agree with their premises and they have sort of a logical train of thought, Hobbes was especially good at this, then you say, okay, I accept your conclusion. So Nozick thinks he gets us off the ground with this idea of, well, you own yourself and your labor, right? And so you own the products of your labor. Very Lockean kind of assumptions here to start off with. And he says, all right, well, if you own those things, you're entitled to keep them. And any thing that is produced from those things, if you're making free choices with stuff you own, like your labor, yourself, or other objects that you already own, then you get to keep those things, and nobody has a right to take them from you. And what that means, right, is so. And by the way, right, we'll get to this in an upcoming slide, but it presumes an initial just distribution, which may be a mountain that Nozick can't climb, and it may be something that even presuming is possible. Allows a theorist like Nozick to smuggle in sort of disingenuous assumptions like, well, if that's impossible, but you talk as if it is possible, then all you're going to do is justify the current distribution as just. If we can't find out an ideal distribution to start from, well, let's throw up our hands and just assume what we have now is just. And in the part that you read, I think that there are some elements of that. I like Nozick; he seems like a really good guy, but I have some concerns about the jump he makes around initial just distribution. So, right, the most famous thing that you hear a lot of libertarians say, and this sign here is an example. Taxation is theft, but the idea that taxation beyond the needs of the minimal state is theft, and in fact, Nozick will say it is slavery, because in his mind, people have decided they need to accumulate, $100,000 a year. And the government has decided that, that it's going to take 20% of that. And now, in order to get what I want, I have to work 20% more. Right? I'm working that 20% extra to pay my taxes for the government. I am laboring for someone not of my free choice. And he says that's the same thing as slavery, though. He is not so blasé about it as to say that is the same exact kind of wrong as literal slavery, but I think that he would say that it is a lesser form that is a wrong for the same reasons, because it constrains people's liberty and their ability to do what they want with their lives. Again, this is something that the libertarian philosophers make a lot of people uncomfortable with. Taxation is theft. Taxation is slavery. These are kinds of lines that come out of this kind of theory, and maybe that's a bridge too far for you, or maybe it expresses your belief that excessive taxation, as maybe Locke thought, as maybe the framers thought, is a form of tyranny. All right, so what you get out of this entitlement theory is three basic rules to decide, well, are you entitled to that property? Did you acquire it justly, right? So did you get that property without stealing it, without taking it, without forcing it from someone else? All right, you've got it. You've got this. You own your car, you own your house, you own your land. Sure, okay. Is it just? Well, you can transfer it however you voluntarily want to. Sell it to someone else, give it to someone else. Is it just? Were you forced to do this? Were you coerced to do this? No. Did it of your own free will? Then whoever gets that property and whatever contract or trade or negotiation is reached, just it's fine. And then the third is, well, if either of these first two are violated, then we need to rectify it. Right? We need to, if somebody steals your property, we give it back. We take it from them and give it back to you, in order to reestablish a just distribution that then people can make free choices to what to do with their property. Now, this sounds really, really basic. It's a really thin sort of understanding of property rights, and in some respects, it doesn't really explain all that much. And that is, again, a problem that some people have with Nozick, is this idea of, well, what do you mean just acquisition? What do you mean transferring without coercion? Am I transferring without? If I am starving and you say, well, I'll give you some food to feed yourself and your family, but you have to pay me a 50% interest fee on the value of that food. What is your choice? Is your choice is to starve or to pay that fee? Well, Nozick would probably say that if the government regulated, if it passed a regulation that prevented me from making that deal, that's unjust. That's the liberty of contract, right? So when we go to like the Lochner era of U.S. Supreme Court jurisprudence, it's a very libertarian era where it says the government, where the court said the government was unable to regulate in contracts with things like minimum wage laws or maximum wage hours or worker safety conditions. If you want a contract to work in an unsafe condition where you might die in a mine cave-in, that's up to you, right? And this is the Nozickian state. This is but it's a state of that maximizes, he thinks, negative liberty, the liberty to do what you want without anyone putting their hands on you in like that Hobbesian sense where someone physically stops you from doing what you want. And where he becomes most persuasive is in his most famous hypothetical, the Wilt Chamberlain example. And oh man, right? You guys know Wilt? 100 points, like, man, what a star. But maybe in more contemporary parlance, for me it would be Jordan. For you guys, maybe it's LeBron. But imagine someone who is just so skilled, so talented, that is able to do something so beautiful, be it basketball or painting or acting, and you want nothing more than to watch them do what they do. And imagine that we put together. So Nozick says, all right, like whatever you think is the original just distribution, we'll rectify all of that. Is it equal? Everyone gets $100. All right, everyone gets $100. Now everyone in America has $100. Or do you think it's something else, some other, different groups of people based on their different initial holdings, Native Americans or what have you, just initial distribution, they have more, other people have less, whatever you think it is. He says, I'll grant it to you. Initial just distribution. Now Wilt comes to you and says, hey, everyone, right? He goes on TV or whatever, makes an announcement. I'm willing to play basketball, but only if everybody gives me $5. Otherwise, I'm going to sit at home. I don't want to work. And everyone says, well, I'll pay $5 to watch Wilt play. That would be awesome, right? He scored 100 points in a game, right? I mean, what would you pay to see Jordan versus Bird, to see LeBron win this last championship? Although LeBron with the Cavs all the way over the Lakers. Still, right? Still, yeah, I would happily pay my $5 to watch any of these people play. Well, if 50,000 of us make this agreement, at the end of the day, each of us is $5 poorer, and Wilt is $25,000 richer. And he owns that money, right? We gave it to him. We owned it justly. We gave it to him. He owns it justly now. And the government comes in and says, hey, Wilt, we're going to take 30% of that. And then we're going to give it back to some other people. We're going to build roads. We're going to build hospitals. We're going to give health insurance to some poor kids. And Wilt says, no, I don't want you to take my money. Nozick says, well, why is it just if he owns it and he doesn't want to give it, what right do you have? He's entitled to it. You're not entitled to it. He has the best claim on that money, not the government and not these poor kids who need health insurance. That's the way the cookie crumbles, right? This is the right. And so one of the things that Nozick says is, all right, like, let's imagine the government comes in and it redistributes and makes everything just, and gives the kids their sick money and builds the roads, and now Wilt's down to whatever we consider to be a just amount of money. And then he goes and plays another basketball game. He's got more money. We got to go there and take his money again. Take his money again. And when Nozick talks in the article about patterning, this idea that if there is a ideal outcome that you're trying to reach, instead of just letting the process of free choice, work out as how it may, let the chips fall as they may, then the government and, the majority, right, through the government, is going to be reaching their hands in and constraining and pushing and reorganizing and extracting from individuals constantly. Right? Constant loss of liberty is what Nozick thinks. Free choices, in his mind, produce inequality, and that's just something that you have to accept as the price of freedom. All right, so problems with Nozick. You guys might think I've been ungenerous to Nozick, but people tend to like this theory quite a bit. It seems very simple in a lot of ways. But here are some problems, or maybe some objections to start off with, right? So a lot of people are thinking, well, capitalism makes people rich, right? That's why it's good, like a utilitarian justification for this. In actual fact, no, the state is enormously important in creating wealth. Certainly the minimal state provides a minimal backdrop, as Locke says, for, if there are no police, then, are you going to have theft? Are you going to have, if there are no courts, are you going to have contracts? Are you going to, draw up a contract? I will pay you next year this amount of money for this service. If I can't take you to court or I can't call the police, then this kind of commerce isn't going to happen. Everyone's going to be poorer. But, we know for a fact that if we have to rely on private actions to build roads or to invest in science and research, or vaccines, right? If vaccine development for COVID was contingent on everyone paying for that research ahead of time, I'm Pfizer and I'm only going to do, the government's not going to pay for this. The government's not going to seed that money by taxing us and pooling our money without our free choice. The vaccine for COVID would never be developed, right? And what would happen to our economy? We would have, a pandemic until we had herd immunity. Which not only would mean tons of deaths, but it would mean loss of wealth for all kinds of companies. So more than the minimal state is needed to maximize the ability for a society to produce wealth. Right. This is something that we learned in the New Deal as well. Right. After the Great Depression, that government has a bigger role to play in creating a successful capitalist economy, even if your only goal is to create as much wealth as possible. So it's not a utilitarian justification; it's a liberty justification. Nozick says that even if it makes us all poor, we should protect liberty. Better that we all have a minimal state and are all, poor and just making whatever contracts we can deal, shortened lives, less money, less prosperity. That doesn't matter. He may be a believer that, we're going to be able to work out our, the roads will be built and there will be commerce because private, people will pay tolls and things like that, and private investment will get things done. But if they don't, and we're all kind of pretty poor, and there's 40-year life expectancy, Nozick would say, so be it. Liberty is that important, right? Negative liberty over positive liberty. Negative liberty over the ability to live a good life. Right? Those are them's the stakes. But another problem that pops up here is, again, like, why would you consent if you were offered the option, and this gets us back to Rawls. Rawls says, imagine a hypothetical, under the in the original position, under the veil of ignorance. What state would you pick if you had 100 states, 1,000 states, whatever the fictional states are lined up? Which one would you pick? And the one that everyone would pick is the one we all can assume that we've contracted to because we think it's fair, right? So what would you pick when you're putting on your what's fair for everyone hat is sort of the way to think of Rawls' original position. And instead, Nozick's minimal state is based on, when would the first person object? He thinks that there are certain things that everyone would agree to, and most things that even if the vast majority of people would agree to, some people wouldn't. And so, no, those things don't get built into the state. But realistically, if you were to say to people would you rather leave this state and contract into this other one? If almost everyone would say yes, 90% of people would say, yeah, I want to contract into the one where, I have roads. That's we want to get into that, right? Wouldn't that break down? Wouldn't that destroy just as fast the minimal state social contract? Because everyone would abandon it. Nobody would actually agree to it. And frankly, we see this in a lot of protest right now, and complaints over injustice in this state. As in, there are a lot better states that we can imagine contracting into. You're not holding up America your end of the bargain because this is not acceptable for me. I would either I would pick another state, or maybe in some cases even I would take my chances in a Mad Max, like instead of agreeing to a state where Jeff Bezos gets to keep his billions and billions of dollars, well, let's let the chips fall where they may. Let's get rid of the police and let's see what I can take from Jeff. And that sounds maybe not convincing to you guys. But this idea of why is the state that are we really to believe that his minimal state is in a Lockean sense the rational state that 100% of people would rationally agree to, only when it is offered as an alternative to no state, anarchy, right? Anarchy, state, utopia. He says you don't get utopia because everyone doesn't agree with it. You don't get anarchy because nobody wants it. You get the minimal state instead. And it's sort of like, well, but why are the choices anarchy and the minimal state? If you offer people more states, then in order to produce an actual agreement, we'd have to negotiate, we'd have to compromise, we'd have to produce something that was more robust, would be the way people would kind of push back on this minimal state logic. And then there's also, again, like, well, how about we have, a minimal police force and minimal courts, but do I necessarily agree if I am someone who's poor and doesn't own stock? Am I necessarily going to agree to courts that enforce stock purchase agreements? Nah, maybe not, right? Maybe not, right? Why do you get the parts of the state that you want as the minimal state, but I don't get roads as part of the minimal state? I'm not sure I agree. More controversially, Rawls's pushback is that, even if you were able to produce a initial just distribution, and then Wilt Chamberlain is super talented and he gets to be rich, Rawls would say, the construction of a state that turns Wilt Chamberlain's talent into property, money, right? Money is a social construct. It's something that we make together through our agreement to say, all right, Wilt, you get to keep that money. Otherwise, we're in the Hobbesian state of nature where it's like, well, Wilt, you seem to have made a lot of money by dribbling that ball and dunking it in that hoop. But I have a club and I'm going to take whatever I want of it. You're not talented enough to keep us from taking your money. Well, instead, we acknowledge Wilt's money is legitimate and agree to let him keep it as part of this contract that creates the construct of property, right? Property for someone like Rawls is not some natural right. It doesn't come from God and nature and inevitability. Maybe we all agree that you have a right to life, but I don't agree that you have a right to property, the property that you only get to have, that you only own because of the courts and the military and the police and all of these other things that I'm agreeing to. I want my cut if I'm going to agree to a system that protects and enables your ability to generate that wealth. And so the most radical interpretation of Rawls is that, there is no desert based on being smarter or working harder or coming from a good family. All of those things are arbitrary, and we distribute wealth on them, not because you were born smart, so you deserve to have better health care. You were born smart, so you deserve to have a nicer car. It's not how desert works for Rawls. And frankly, the whole notion of desert kind of evaporates in a Rawlsian perspective. Nozick's not about desert. He says, let's get rid of that. Let's talk about entitlement. There's no more just distribution than the distribution that already exists. I have the stuff, therefore it's mine, is sort of the Nozickian reply to that. And I think, it's an interesting debate. But here's, I think, what really strikes most people in terms of pushing back on Nozick. And it's original just distribution, you say. Well, American philosopher Robert Nozick, what was the original American just distribution of wealth on which all property is today descended from? Was it, those lands that were owned by people that a genocide was conducted against? Was it the industry that was either directly or indirectly the product of enslaved labor? How about, generations and generations after slavery, when the state, which maybe you say, Nozick, that I hate the state, but the state was involved in creating and distributing the wealth of Americans, at least up through mid or late, or at least through the time he was writing Anarchy, State, and Utopia in the 1970s. Up into the 1960s, we didn't even have a formal democracy in America during Jim Crow. And so this idea that there is a just distribution that we can find and that we're willing to, enforce through reparations. All right. So there are two options here. One is, you're going to be able to figure out who deserves what, who's entitled to what, and go back and make it all right? Nozick, no, you're not. But imagine you were. It probably involves taking everything from most of the people in America and redistributing it to a handful of survivors of, native tribes. Is that cool, Nozick? It's all based on theft. It's all based on genocide and slavery. So what are we supposed to do with that? I mean, maybe Nozick's libertarianism is actually the most radical redistributive philosophy that you can come up with. But I don't know where you go with it. I don't know practically, but I also don't know intellectually how you can say, if colonial family X takes land from native family Y and then uses that land to grow cotton with enslaved labor by imported slave Z, who gets what out of that, and then that maybe that wealth is laundered for many generations through other businesses that are, right? Even a laundromat, right? You have a laundromat today. Can we trace the quarters that are going into that laundromat's machines back to some proper distribution? It seems to make no sense. And by the way, this is where critical race theory or feminist theory, right? Women in the home, that kind of thing, denied opportunities to labor, to work, to generate that intergenerational wealth, pass it down. Critical theory like this and decolonizing a curriculum lets us stop and say, well, we would only take seriously a theory like libertarianism if we ignored the perspective of the descendants of slavery and native genocide. So why would we take this seriously if we take those perspectives as legitimate, serious parts of the conversation? And in fact, right, those may be the most obvious examples of where the state and where social power took from some unjustly and gave to others. But once you make that leap, you start saying, well, all of history is the state in whatever form it's existed in taking from some and giving to others, or using its power unequally to create the conditions where some can prosper and others cannot. Well, geez, does anyone who's poor today really deserve it? Are they there because of some morally lacking character of them compared to the people who have prospered through their lucky situation in history? Rawls would say that's where we got you, Nozick. So and there's also this question then, right, of what is your application? If you can never go back to a just initial distribution of power, is it more just to say that we're going to have lower taxes? We're going to lower our 30% tax rate to 20%, to 10%, to 5%. Why is that? If nobody is entitled to what they have because it's all the product of historical injustice, then why is any distribution more just than any other distribution? The mob is not entitled to make their money that they launder through legitimate businesses because it's on the back of theft. All the money that's out there is on the back of theft, right? Real theft, not taxation theft, like Nozick talks about. Real theft, slavery, theft of land. Right? How do we, what does that mean for a modern state to say we should be more libertarian? We should have smaller, more minimal government. I don't know if we don't go back and switch everything to an initial just distribution. It's unclear to me how a minimal state today, moving to a minimal state today, is in any way just. Right? It's just locking in the injustices of the past, which is the number 3 principle in his 3 rules that you have to have a just state. If we can't do that last one, those first 2, where I own what I have and I get to do whatever I want with it, and no government or majority of people can touch what's mine, those parts aren't justice even for Nozick, right? And so I think there's a disingenuous element here to this kind of libertarianism, right? This is, by the way, right? Slave auction, massacre at Wounded Knee. These are these historical notes make a theory of justice based on historical choices, to me, sort of unworkable. Conversely, right, we might ask, are we okay with this Rawlsian notion that nobody really deserves anything, and we just redistribute things so that the forces of chance and luck in life are harnessed so that everybody does better than they would do without the state, right? This idea of the max men principle that Rawls talks about, of what would you agree to? You would agree to the kinds of basic institutions that would make the least well off the best, right? Put them in the best position, right? So create a wealthy society full of technology and commerce and medical advances and things like that. We all want those. We all benefit from those. So maybe we'll structure our inequalities not because anyone deserves them, but because, as we discussed with Rawls, maybe it makes sense to pay doctors more so we can have good doctors. Not because the doctor who is smart and hardworking deserves more. He was just lucky to be born that way, or born into a family that raised him that way, or be born into a neighborhood or a state that helps him become that. Doesn't deserve more, but it's good for all of us if he gets more. And that's the Rawlsian difference. It's very, very different, very opposite from Nozick in a lot of ways. But what's interesting is that, in a sense, both of them do away with this basic idea of you get what you have because you deserve it. Entitlement is a little different than deserve. Like you're like a Aristotelian, you're a good person, so you deserve more. No, it's just you got it. Nobody else deserves it more than you, so you're entitled to keep it. Rawls, you don't deserve or even are entitled to keep anything. The only thing that gives you an entitlement to your property is that you having it is better for everyone. All right, so this is our dispute. Who who properly owns the history of Locke? We'll get into it in class and maybe in some other videos if I can get them done. All right, thanks, guys.